Happy Labor Day, everybody, and welcome to BNC Live. I hope you are enjoying all of your barbecues and all that good stuff while I'm working for you. I'm Brittany Jones in for Tashani Whitlow. So let's get to your news making headlines across the country this holiday. More than 7 million Americans are losing their federal unemployment benefits today. 18 months ago, Congress passed a bill that added $300 unemployment checks to state benefits. The expiration of the unemployment benefits today is being seen as another blow to Americans who are still struggling to pay their bills. A federal eviction moratorium that keeps Americans from being kicked out of their homes has already expired. And a Marine is accused of shooting and killing 4 people in Polk County, Florida. The victims include a mom and a 3-month-old baby she was holding. Investigators say 33-year-old Brian Riley did not know the family. An 11-year-old girl survived their attack, thank God, after being shot 7 times. Riley got into a shootout with police. When they got to the home, he was arrested Sunday morning. And 1 week after Ida made landfall as a Category 4 storm, more than 500,000 customers in Louisiana are still without power, and it could be a few more weeks before it's restored. The storm is blamed on at least 16 deaths after the hurricane hit Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. At least 50 people are blamed on Ida after it hit the Northeast and caused record rain and flash flooding. President Biden is expected to travel to New Jersey and New York this week to get a first-hand look at the damage. And Saturday marks 20 years since the 9/11 terror attacks. It's hard to forget the video and the pictures we saw that day when 2,996 Americans were killed. 19 militants associated with Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 different planes to carry out the attacks. The militants are believed to have been retaliating against the U.S. for our support of Israel, involvement in the Persian Gulf War, and the American military's presence in the Middle East. 2 of the planes were used to crash into the World Trade Center. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon. And the 4th plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania after passengers fought back against the hijackers. President Bush flew to Ground Zero as first responders searched the rubble the day after the towers collapsed. Here's what he had to say that day.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The American-led international effort Operation Enduring Freedom was created to push the Taliban out of Afghanistan and destroy Osama bin Laden's terror network started on October 7, 2001. You'll remember that it was 1 week ago today that the last American soldier left Afghanistan. Now, we have a first responder who was at Ground Zero after the 9/11 terror attacks. Dr. Matthew Fogg joins us live from Washington, D.C. to tell us more about his experience. Good afternoon, Dr. Fogg, and welcome to BNC.
Good to be with you.
And Dr. Fogg, I have a special place in my heart for first responders because I am marrying one. So Dr. Fogg, you know, how do you feel approaching 20 years, thinking back to that day? What was it like for you to be at Ground Zero after the terror attacks?
Well, first of all, congratulations. You're making a good choice in marrying a first responder.
Thank you.
Yes, when you're talking about on that particular day, I mean, when I really look back on it, there was a lot of fear and concern because when I arrived in New York, the night before the planes hit, I was at a hotel that was about 30, 40 blocks away. Mm-hmm. And so it just looked like the property was almost right up on you. And when I first went back to when I saw it on TV in my room, the buildings were burnt. One building was burning, and they said a plane had run into it. So everybody just simply thinking plane somehow got off track and made a mistake. But then when that second one came around and hit it, you knew then there was a problem. And when I went outside and everybody is hauling and screaming and pointing at the World Trade Centers and the smoke and could see it coming up, I knew then this is a real issue that America is in a problem. And then I got one phone call through. Somebody told me that a plane had, because I'm from Washington, D.C. area, and it was amazing that I happened to be in New York, but somebody told me a plane that was headed for the Pentagon and that everybody was concerned and running and trying to get out. So we thought that America was under attack totally, an all-out war, and you couldn't get phone calls out on your cell phone. So all you could do is go on what was happening on the news. it was pretty traumatizing because I had to sit there and I'm thinking to myself, how can I get involved? How can I go down? How can I help out? Because of all of my training and SWAT for the U.S. Marshal Special Operations Group and training that I had and search and rescue and dive rescue and all of this, I was like, okay, Matthew, even though you're out, you're on leave, you need to go down there and get involved. So I went across the street, a surplus store, bought fatigues, Army black gear, flashlights, everything, and started headed down there. And next thing I know, I was in the middle of it.
Wow, I can only imagine. And being in the middle of it, what was that like for you?
Well, that again, you know, it was surreal, to be honest with you, because you saw all of the you know, the fire, the smoke, the, you know, brimstone, everything. And people was just chaos, and people were trying to get away and trying to run, and it was just a lot going on at the time. And I just started helping out. Later, People's Magazine had a picture of me. I didn't even know I was in People's Magazine, but someone called me and said, "Fogg, you know, you're in People's." And some firefighters bringing the body of one of the firefighters that we was way to recover. He died. We were able to recover him. We were bringing him down off the hill, and they got a picture of me in front leading these guys, and we were trying to get him to the location where they had the bodies. It was just, everybody was on the hill. You had volunteers, you had law enforcement out there from different counties from around the United States. People were coming in and going, and it was just a lot of action going on. And the search and rescue, I was part of that, trying to find people alive and working and going into areas. And it was just a lot going on in such a condensed area, but yet it was so huge. When two big buildings like that dropped down into one spot, it was surreal. I mean, it's just trying to explain it. You could never explain it. Somebody would have to see the amount of damage and clutter and fire and brimstone to really understand it, at the same time to know that your life was in grave danger by being there.
A very important job on such a big day. Well, Dr. Fogg will be back with us to continue this conversation after this short break. You're watching BNC Live. Stay with us. Saturday will be 20 years since the 9/11 terror attacks. 19 militants linked to Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes using box cutters and knives. The hijackers used the planes to crash into the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Passengers on United Flight 93 fought back against the hijackers and crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
2,996 Americans were killed in the 9/11 terror attacks. Dr. Matthew Fogg is back with us from Washington, D.C. He's been sharing his experience with us about being a first responder on 9/11. And Dr. Fogg, thank you so much for sticking around. You were describing to us what it was like for you searching through the rubble at Ground Zero.
Yeah, it was surreal. I mean, it was so much going on, and we were just trying to find people alive, and we were I bought a lot of smaller digging tools so we could dig in the ground, because our concern was we didn't want to cause cinder blocks or something else to fall on somebody. When you're in search and rescue mode like this, any type of operation of this nature, you got to always be concerned about somebody being under the rubble that's maybe somewhere where they're stuck and they can't get out. And if we just go on just at it willy-nilly, you could kill somebody else. So it was a process of trying to make certain that we could get 5 people. And the whole time I was there, we found about like 7 people alive. But there were more people that was found, but there were a lot of bodies that were recovered. Also, you were running into bodies and parts and that type of thing, and then the fire and everything else. So it was just an operation of trying to say, when do we get this thing under control? When do we get it to where, everybody feels more comfortable in working in our surroundings? The main thing, we didn't want other officers to get hurt, or law enforcement people, or whatever, first responders to get hurt. I retired as a chief deputy U.S. Marshal, but we just didn't want people to get, and so the goal was to try to save as many people as we could at the same time try to get the situation. It was a tedious process, and then I left.
And Dr. Fogg, you broke up just a little bit on this, but I want to be able to ask you this. So many first responders actually suffered from PTSD after the terror attacks. Did you experience this yourself?
I did to some degree. I mean, I'm under the what they call the emergency 9/11 medical alert scenario, that I get a physical every year for my lungs and everything like that, because we was breathing in a lot of dust and air that was harmful. I didn't know it at the time for a while. Then I learned later that there was a lot of chemicals in the air. When I'm thinking the smoke wasn't there, I was okay. But I learned there were a lot of chemicals and stuff in the air, even though the smoke wasn't there. And a good friend of mine, Magilo Plume, she just died from it, and from contracting cancer from it. So there have been quite a few people that have passed away, but the reality was the danger. A lot of stuff it was instant. You was there as a first responder. You go in a lot of times. That's what we trained even in law enforcement. You go into dangerous situations a lot of times without concern for your own health and safety. You train on how to take care of yourself, but reality of it is that when you're in a situation this is unstable situation, you don't know what you're going to be confronted with. So yes, I would say, to answer your question, there was a lot of concern with me over the years of, the trauma of seeing all of the stuff that I saw and
Yeah, and I remember. Everyone remembers where they were when this happened, and obviously it changed America forever. How did it change your life? I apologize that we lost Dr. Fogg, him sharing such a very, very important part of his life and a very important part of our history here in America. But you can count on BNC to bring you all of the updates as we continue to remember those victims from 9/11. Switching gears, America went to a war soon after the 9/11 terrorist attack, and last week, after 20 years, that war officially ended. After the break, BNC Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Nair Huck joins us to discuss what's next in the war on terror. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are watching the latest developments coming out of Afghanistan. The Taliban say they have taken control of the last province in the country. This comes as the family of a policewoman claims the Taliban murdered the officer at her home Saturday night in front of her sons. The officer was 8 months pregnant. The Taliban says they are not responsible for her death and they are investigating the incident. BNC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Nair Huck joins us now with the latest updates. Nair, good afternoon. First, tell us, because the story obviously keeps developing, tell us about the evacuees still in the country.
Brittany, the United States and the coalition of European countries had managed to airlift more than 100,000 people out of the country in just 2 weeks. However, that's not everyone, and we know there were at least 500 Americans, for a variety of reasons, who still remained in Afghanistan. Some of them were not able to get to the Kabul airport before the evacuation was completed last Tuesday. Some of them opted to stay because they believed in continuing the development or humanitarian work that they had done in the country prior to the United States withdrawal. The challenge we are seeing now and hearing reports about are several planes that are at the airport, which is now officially in control of the Taliban, that many of those planes have been effectively held down and they are not allowed to fly. We are hearing reports from members of Congress that there may be some U.S. citizens on board those flights. So that is now the latest back and forth between the Taliban and the United States government, is trying to make sure that the U.S. citizens that remain still have some protection from the United States, despite the fact there is no longer a big military presence, and the U.S. embassy there has still not officially opened. So some of these American citizens are effectively in diplomatic limbo.
And Nair, can you break down the ISIS-K threat?
The challenge that we are seeing and with the withdrawal is, of course, the security environment that remained. We are coming up this week on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. 9/11 launched the war in Afghanistan. It was a terrorist attack that it started from leaders who were sitting in Afghanistan. Yet, nearly 20 years later, we saw American soldiers being attacked by suicide bombings claimed by ISIS-K. That is a new threat, not Al-Qaeda from 20 years ago, but a new terrorist threat that took root in the chaos of Afghanistan starting 2015. The United States did retaliate with drone attacks, killing those who were responsible. That does look like the new front of warfare and counterterrorism going forward. Not boots on the ground, but targeted strikes from a distance. Now, of course, the concern there with the ethics is also knowing that the right people were targeted. There are also reports surfacing that the convoy that was taken out by U.S. drone strikes were actually civilians. Several civilian casualties, or reports that it was a shepherd family. So without having eyes on the ground, reporters on the ground, it's very difficult to really see what will happen in Afghanistan next.
Yeah, you just feel for those people over there. What's the latest right now on Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin? Where are they in this?
Those two are, of course, the leaders of foreign policy in the United States. The Secretary of State responsible for refugees and the protection of U.S. citizens and diplomats overseas. The Secretary of Defense, of course, responsible for military and counterterrorism coordination. Both are traveling to the Middle East, to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait. Those are major U.S. military installations where actually thousands of Afghan refugees are also being processed. So part of the reason they are visiting these countries is to not only shore up the relationships, but recalibrate for what military engagement, what war looks like for the United States going forward. Now that the United States no longer has a big military base in Afghanistan, it looks like most of the energy will be concentrated in the Middle East, directing at efforts in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere in the region.
And are you predicting this to get much worse?
It depends on what you call much worse, Brittany, right? President Biden had put down the red line that no more U.S. troops would lose their lives in these forever wars. Drone attacks, or what the military likes to call over-the-horizon attacks, because you don't see it coming because there aren't necessarily people directly involved in the execution of it. That is going to be the new frontier, and has been for quite some time, for counterterrorism missions. So that threat, the terrorist threat, is indeed still there. We know about ISIS, the original ISIS, still in Syria. We know the United Nations has called sub-Saharan Africa the greatest threat for terrorism, with the people, African people, being the #1 target of terrorism in places like Somalia and Nigeria. So for many years, the threat had been moved away from Afghanistan and to what we know as the AFRICOM and CENTCOM region in the Middle East and Africa.
All right, BNC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Nir Huck. Nir, thank you. And you stay with us at home. We'll see you back here in about 3 minutes. Welcome back to BNC Live. The federal eviction moratorium that was set to end October 3rd, but it came to an end today. This comes after the Supreme Court ruled the CDC could not extend the moratorium and put that responsibility in the hands of Congress. BNC correspondent Janine Donaldson is in Charlotte with more details on how some communities are working to prevent evictions.
We were not expecting that the rug would be taken out from underneath them.
7 years, and advocates say people should be allowed to stay in their homes until a happy medium can be reached. Reporting in Charlotte, I'm Janine Donaldson for BNC.
Thanks to Janine. Well, many people who are fully vaccinated from COVID-19 may want to roll up their sleeves just one more time. Dr. Anthony Fauci says a third dose of the vaccine may be necessary in the fight against COVID-19. This comes as Johns Hopkins University reports the U.S. is getting closer to 650,000 COVID-19 related deaths.
We need the boost because ultimately it may turn out, Jim, that the ultimate proper immunization regimen is a 3-dose regimen. Remember, we made it a 2-dose regimen. We were dealing with an emergent situation. We needed to get those vaccines out because they were life-saving, and in fact, they have been life-saving. What we're observing now, not only here in the United States, but in other countries, including Israel and the UK, that the durability of the protection tends to wane, particularly in the context of the Delta variant.
And coming up in the next hour BNC Live, we'll speak with a doctor about what the pandemic picture may look like as we head into the fall and winter months. A plan to tackle crime on the West Coast. This as violence continues to plague U.S. cities. The city of Oakland, California is trying to implement new strategies to put an end to gun violence. And the police chief there is asking religious and community leaders to join in on that effort. BNC correspondent Ansar Hassan breaks down that plan for us.
Reporting in Treasure Island, Ansar Hassan, BNC.
General Motors is looking to halt production at nearly all of its assembly plants in the U.S. starting today because of a chip shortage. It has led to limited inventories of new vehicles at GM and across the industry, which in turn has pushed car prices to record highs, folks. The company says its assembly plants in both Arlington, Texas and Flint, Michigan will remain open. Well, no one in the world is stopping Anita Baker these days after announcing that she has won the fight in reclaiming her masters. The Quiet Storm Queen made the announcement by posting this tweet, letting fans know that they can now go stream her music after getting the masters of her original recordings of all of her songs. Baker had previously asked fans to not stream her music until she took ownership of her catalog. And stay with us, much more BNC Live coming up after this short break. Welcome back to BNC Live. A black man was wrongfully arrested back in 1997 after being accused of killing 4 people at a furniture store in Mississippi. Curtis Flowers spent 23 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, and he's now suing the district attorney who prosecuted him 6 times. Here to help us break this all down for us is BNC's chief legal correspondent, Dr. Laura McNeil. Dr. Laura, good afternoon. You know, talking about this story, I mean, I can't imagine actually spending that many years in prison for something you didn't do. Do you think we spent too much time on police reform instead of prosecutorial correction when it comes to a case like this?
You know, I think we have spent too much time, or rather, let me correct that, not too much time, but not enough equal time as well on prosecutorial reform. And the reason why is because, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has identified or established essentially that prosecutors have immunity from civil lawsuits, and because of that, it's very difficult to hold them accountable. And so what I mean by immunity, you essentially can't sue them for things such as hiding evidence, coercing witnesses. And so because of this, there's a lot of, to be quite honest, people are discouraged. Why bother when the law is in the favor of prosecutors?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. I mean, people obviously are really paying attention to a case like this because it happens too many times to our black men and our black women as well. So just how common is prosecutorial conduct around the country?
You know, surprisingly, it's more common than we would think. So essentially, the Innocence Project did a study. They looked at 5 different states, and what they found is that out of those 5 different states, there were 600, imagine that, 660 cases in which courts found that there were indeed prosecutorial misconduct. Now that's a lot of defendants that have been impacted by prosecutors essentially saying that they've either broken the law or they've violated the code of ethics.
Yeah. And I mean, are there any examples to successful efforts to address prosecutorial misconduct?
You know, thankfully there is. So there are a lot of places such as the Innocence Project that I just mentioned, the ACLU. They're trying to figure out how to increase prosecutor accountability. And so one of the things they've done is you have to keep in mind, Brittany, that prosecutors have a lot of power. They yield a lot of power in our criminal justice system. Specifically, they decide who gets charged, who doesn't get charged, whether or not to put evidence before a grand jury. And so when you consider all those things, what they've done is when prosecutors are given the initial police report, some counties have said, you know what, we're going to remove all identifiers of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation. And counties that have done that have found that prosecutors tend to have a different outcome, meaning they've seen actually a reduction in racial disparities and a reduction in disparities against people that are members of our LGBTQ community in terms of charging decisions.
And Dr. Laura, what legal advice do you give to family members like Curtis and Ahmad Aubry, people who have been victims of this?
Yes, you know, the advice I give them is, you know, they are the shining examples of doing what everyone should do in that situation. Don't give up. Continue to ask for a special prosecutor, you know, as we saw in the Ahmad Aubry case, to look at the case, to look at the facts, to see if there is indeed some bias that is impacting justice, that's preventing our criminal justice system from working in a fair and equitable way.
And before I let you go, as you look at this as an attorney yourself, are there any changes that you would like to see to the prosecutorial process?
Absolutely. What needs to happen is we need to remove this judge-made law, because it's nothing in the Constitution that gives prosecutors immunity. They should not have immunity. They should be held to the same standards and accountability as any ordinary citizen. And so that is the first step to ensuring that prosecutors are not yielding their power and influence to circumvent justice, to undermine our criminal justice system.
All right, BNC's Chief Legal Correspondent, Dr. Laura McNeil. Dr. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
In today's special segment, The New Norm, while back-to-school season ramps up across the country, studies show many working parents are opting out of going back to the office, and they're willing to change jobs to do just that. It's no secret working from home has become the new norm for millions of Americans, and experts say aside from the obvious upsides of working remotely, like no commute, nobody don't like that traffic, or more flexibility, black workers are benefiting in a different way. BNC correspondent Walter Morris explains why.
It is BNC.
Working remote helps you get an extra workout in too, and you can catch the New Norm series every Monday and Friday on BNC Live. Now, this weekend's Orange Blossom Classic delivered a defensive HBCU battle in Miami. Meanwhile, two tennis champs put their emotions on display after crushing losses at the U.S. Open. That's next on BNC Live.
The absolutely vile messages some left her on social media. This is one of the more mild ones that we actually can show you. Most of them we can't, as they were that explicit. Sloan Stephens said she received upwards of 2,000 of these types of messages. So Brittany, when these people, specifically the young people, attempt to explain why they go through what they do, we should believe them. And look at how young they all are. Sloan Stephens, 28, Naomi Osaka, 23, Simone Biles, who of course was part of this conversation at the start of the Olympics, 24.
Yeah.
None of us had it all together at that age.
Right.
When you combine the spotlight that's on them with the money that they have and all of what comes their way in terms of social media, how can you not think of what it is they endure day after day? Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
You think about too just being so damaging to their career earlier, like you're watching Naomi break down, and then I'm reading the messages about what Sloan received, and people telling her, I hope you get raped.
Yes.
I mean,
like I said, I mean, there were plenty that we couldn't show you.
Yeah.
Because they were that unconscionably rude, vile, pick your adjective.
Yeah.
It's tough to deal with, and again, these are young women.
Young women, exactly. So, we already endure a lot, and black women at that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And for all the old school people that say, you know, just put up with it, we had to deal with it.
Yeah.
The older crowd did not have to deal with social media messages that
another
just
beast.
flood your inbox. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you, Anthony. And that's going to do it for this hour of BNC Live, but we'll see you back here in 3 minutes with more of your top stories. Stay with us.